Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. We are super excited for tonight's masterclass, the first one of June for us, but not a normal one for us. We have Mike Dawkins here from WorldCast Anglers to kind of chat about fishing Yellowstone and Jackson Hole. So I just wanted to jump into a couple of reminders before I hand it off to Eric and Mike to kind of roll through things tonight. So reminder number one, your sound and video are both off. So if you've got kids running around in the background or dogs, whatever it might be, we can't see you, we can't hear you, so don't worry about that. Number two, just want to run through the chat and the QA one time real quick. I know everybody sometimes gets confused. So chat, chime in where you're joining us from, chat back and forth, maybe find a new fishing buddy in there. Q&A, let's try to keep that one either app focused questions or questions that we can ask Mike at the end of class. So I'll be trying to answer some of those app focused questions if you have any of those throughout the night, if you came to class with any of those, and then we'll bank any of the questions that are either fishing Yellowstone or Jackson Hole related for the end, and we'll throw those at Mike all at once. Number three, class is recorded. So if you have to drop off at any time or you want to just watch things back to run through things. There's going to be a lot of information thrown at you tonight, I'm sure. We will be posting this on the Trout Routes YouTube channel tomorrow morning, probably mid-morning or so. And then number four, I'm sure some of you had seen in the email or other places, we have a pretty awesome giveaway tonight coming from the WorldCast crew. It's going to be a loaded fly box, and we're throwing in a subscription to Trout Routes in there, and we'll be tossing two other subscriptions to Trout Routes somebody's way as well. So we'll toss that link in the chat at the very end of class, right before we switch over to Q&A. So make sure you stick around to the end of class so you can enter that. And without any further ado, Eric, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm very excited to welcome Mike to the program. Mike, thank you so much for being here. Before I kick it over to you, I did want to throw another quick shout out for that fly box. Mike, it took me a minute to realize that this thing is double-sided and it is absolutely loaded with all kinds of bugs that anybody would be happy to add to their arsenal. So stay tuned. We'll drop the link, like Matt said, later on in the program for you to enter to win one of these or to win this fly box. But it's a solid lineup. Mike, you're the president of WorldCast Anglers, and I know you've got an awful long history in the fly fishing world, in the outdoor space. I want to welcome you again, and would love to give you the floor to introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about your background.
Sweet. Thanks, Eric and Matt. Appreciate it. Really happy to be here and presenting about fly fishing opportunities in my own backyard. I'm one of the few in the industry or in an industry that gets to do what I truly love, and that's fly fishing. And while it comes with its own aches and pains, especially in the summertime that we're gearing up for, as I was touching up this presentation, for current times, I was reflecting back on the 20 years that I've gotten to call Jackson Hole and Teton Valley home for me, and I was whisked away to a feeling of gratitude and appreciation of all of the things that I've gotten to see, to fish, to experience in my 20 years of living here. So it's a really special place to me. As I said, I'm a very fortunate and blessed person to call it home. And I've always been an advocate of the greatest thing in the sport of fly fishing is the fact that the journey never stops. You always have an opportunity to learn from someone else, a new technique, a new area, a new species. Anywhere in the world, we all have this sort of common bond within each other of sharing information and enjoying the outdoors and enjoying our time on the water. So that's sort of in my DNA and deep in my DNA. And I'm going to jump over to my presentation and get going.
Yeah, Mike, that's a great call out. I think that's something that I come back to myself all the time is why, when folks ask me why I like to fly fish, it's that exact reason. You get to dive real deep in a lot of different areas, but there's always another opportunity to learn something new or learn something more. And so I'm really excited to have you talk through some of these treasured waterways this evening. So I'll let you
100%.
take it there.
Yeah, can't wait. So, as Eric and Matt said, my name's Mike Dawkins. I call Victor, Idaho home. I'm currently the president of WorldCast Anglers. We are a fly fishing operation and company based in Victor, Idaho. We have an extensive fly shop. You can see some photos of that with a very extensive fly selection for basically anywhere that you go in the world and anything that you do. We're pretty much locked and loaded to get you on the water and get you, set up for success in that area. We're sort of smack dab in the mecca of trout fishing in the Rocky Mountain West. To the east of us, we have the greater Jackson Hole region with the Snake. We've got the Teton River here in our backyard. To the southwest, we have the South Fork of the Snake. And then to the north of us, we have the Henry's Fork. So we're sort of in that, little triangle of trout mecca per se. We have really long winters here and really short summers. So you can see, some of the snow that piles up around here. We average around 500 total inches of snow at Grand Targhee Ski Resort, which is on this side of the mountain. And, this year it's been going pretty quickly. I wish it wouldn't go as fast, but we're always usually pretty excited to see it melt out and trickle out into all of our cold water lakes, rivers, streams, and still water sort of opportunities.
Fantastic.
But as I was saying, we're the three sort of prongs of WorldCast Anglers. We have our extensive fly shop. We have an extensive domestic day trip outfitting business. And then we have a select destination travel portion of our business that can sort of take you anywhere in the world to curated lodges, in operations of places that we've experienced and really enjoy and know and love. Our main outfitting operations occur mostly on the Snake River in Grand Teton National Park, Yellowstone National Park. That's the Madison River on the west side of Yellowstone National Park. Whoops. The South Fork of the Snake, including, sorry about that. Whoops, I messed up. The South Fork of the Snake, which is a very large watershed located to our southeast, where we also operate our South Fork Hilton overnight trip, which is definitely one not to miss in the greater Jackson Hole and Yellowstone area. It's a 2-day float trip with a 1-night stay at our camp on the South Fork, on the banks of the South Fork of the Snake, aptly named the South Fork Hilton for its comfort and its history there on the water. That's definitely one, if you're looking to get on the water in our area, is one of sort of our specialties and something that we really love. Geez, sorry about that. We also guide on the Teton River, and this is us sliding rafts 1,000 vertical feet down into the Teton Canyon, where there's a plethora of whitewater and pocket water, great dry dropper fishing, all native cutthroat habitat, pretty wild place. The Henry's Fork, which is a very famous river that everybody probably knows about in the trout fly fishing world, located to the north. And we sort of have a plethora of creeks, streams, walkway fisheries that I always say it would take multiple lifetimes to go and experience a lot of those in our area. I always joke that when I retire, if I ever retire, I'm going to spend time fishing more in my own backyard because every time there's just never enough time to go fish everything. But we have more of that sort of DIY fishing than most areas, I would say, in the Rocky Mountain West. You cross-pollinate that with a plethora of public lands in the state of Wyoming and Idaho, and you've got a match made in heaven for DIY walkway anglers looking to do their own thing in fishing in our area.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I was poking around at some of the water you're going to talk through this evening, actually in the app, and I was going to suggest to everyone following along, if you have the ability, go ahead and pull up trout routes on your phone, or if you're watching or have a laptop or a desktop handy. It'll be really interesting as we kind of hit some of these different waterways, and you can really visualize how much water there truly is in this area. I'll admit I'm probably going to be taking some notes as we
Yeah.
dive into some of the details here.
Go for it. Totally. WorldCast Anglers is also home to the Western Rivers Guide School, which is the oldest guide school in the country. We operate three guide schools a season, and then we've been offering a veterans guide school to kick off our season for U.S. veterans and service members that are interested in learning more about fly fishing in a common space around, cohorts and contemporaries.
Cool.
That has a very heavy rowing progression in it. As you'll see, a lot of our rivers, the South Fork of the Snake, the Teton, and the Henry's Fork are very large. And so most of the time, a lot of our guide trips are operating drift boats, and we're a very boat-centric fishery and culture as well. We operate some really cool women's programs. We do some women's rowing clinics. We do like a 101 one-day clinic and then a 201 two-day clinic where we do an evening in the classroom where participants and students go through sort of a lecture or informational session on water and safely, operating a drift boat or a raft or something along those lines. And then they follow it up with a day on the water with a guide with some rowing instruction. We also operate a women's trout camp, which is a trimmed down version of our guide school, a little less focused on the guiding aspect of it and a little bit more on the fun rowing aspects of being on the water and the fishing as well.
Excellent.
We have our heavy destination travel program. This was a photo of a trip we hosted to Providence in the Seychelles this past year with a bunch of customers and friends of ours to a wild place with a lot of wild fish. GTs, barracudas, all sorts of crazy stuff over in that place. So once again, just another one of those examples of where fly fishing can take you outside of like your own backyard and your normal trout species. But as I said, my name is Mike. I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, and I was fortunate to grow up in a family that liked doing stuff outdoors. Always on the lake, always fishing, always tinkering around with things in between sports or sports camps. I think fishing was definitely something that I grasped onto as a young kid and then continued to develop that passion and interest in it. That's my dad on a trip with
Oh,
me in
right on.
Patagonia
Nice.
with a big slab of a brown trout there
Yeah.
in the Esquel Trevelin region.
Very cool.
But I live in Teton Valley here with my wife and now one dog. The lab passed away last
Mhm.
summer after 14 years of adventures in this area, and
Wow.
not a complaint in the world, from him. But we have our King Charles little dog there. That's cross country skiing on Green River Lakes up in the Upper Green Basin in Wyoming. But my wife likes to fly fish too, and I that it definitely is a portion of our time together, and we get to go to cool places and get to travel and do awesome things together. And fly fishing is, always pretty much a core focus of most of those adventures. That was her first tarpon that she ever caught on a fly rod. But I've been pretty fortunate that, when I moved to Jackson Hole as a young guy in 2005, I was a Southern kid excited to live out west and to live his dream of working in the fly fishing industry and fish my brains out. And boy, did I do that, which it grew into getting to go to all the ends of the earth of fishing. So peacock bass in the Amazon of Brazil, monster brown trout there in Patagonia and Argentina. I've traveled to India to catch golden mahseer in the Himalayas there. That's the
Oh,
border
very
of
cool.
India and Nepal. Permit in Ascension Bay, steelhead in Argentina. That's the Rio Santa Cruz, where there's the only Atlantic run of steelhead in the world, which is a pretty wild place. Tarpon in Cuba, that one got away from me in that photo. Was definitely pushing me around.
Nice.
Belize, redfish in Louisiana, Christmas Island, bonefish, largemouth bass, and in Mexico. But when I reflect back on everything, that I've gotten to do, in the world, it's really the home rivers around me where I cut sort of my trout fishing teeth and learned the most about trout angling from everyone in our industry and our community, that I really reflect back on the importance, to me personally and professionally, of being on the water on the South Fork of the Snake, fishing on my own and experiencing fishing in all seasons around our area, as the world gets smaller and smaller, and we have more and more people wanting to experience our great outdoors of what we have. Sometimes, in the busy season, that's when I fill up my trout fishing time.
Sure.
And while everybody's skiing or hitting the powder days or whatever at Grand Targhee or Jackson Hole Mountain Resort, sometimes we can have some pretty darn good trout fishing in the middle of Jackson. That's the Snake, south of Jackson there in December, which was always pretty fun. And you don't see anybody around
Right.
then. But
Yeah,
I'm
that's
not
really cool.
a trout fishing snob. I definitely have a warm water interest as well. So carp fishing, on the lower Snake, down in the Snake River Plain, and smallmouth bass there too. Anything that can get me on the water, I have learned that makes me happy, is usually anything that swims in the water. So I
Yeah,
don't discriminate against anything, of a
fantastic.
fish that'll eat a fly,
Yeah,
at
100%.
all. But a little bit of the geographical explanation of where we are. So if you look at this map, you can obviously see the Grand Tetons. They're the pointiest mountains there that run south to north in that photo. To the west, or to the left of those mountains, is Teton Valley, and that's the valley that I call home, and where our fly shop and headquarters are for our operation. The road that goes through the mountains there to the south or to the left is Teton Pass, or Wyoming Highway 22, that goes into the town of Wilson. It crosses the Snake River, and then it goes into Jackson. The entire valley of Jackson, was originally called Jackson Hole, named after Davy Jackson, which is a famous trapper, of that
Hmm.
whole era of
Okay.
trapping and mountain men. John Coulter, Jim Bridger, Ira Glass, any of those guys that were really pushing the envelope of what was around the next corner. But historically, the Jackson Hole was always pretty vacant in the wintertime. The climate was harsh, the snowpack
Mhm.
was high. It was, pretty poor soil for farming and agricultural purposes. Livestock had a really hard time. And so a
Mhm.
lot of wintering individuals would spend their time in Teton Valley, where I live, or further down in the Snake River Plain towards Idaho Falls,
Okay.
Blackfoot, Pocatello, and so on. But as you can sort of see, we're surrounded by all of these mountain ranges, and those are comprised of either Grand Teton National Park, there in the middle, Yellowstone National Park to the north, where you can see the geysers. You
Mhm.
have, Bridger Teton National Forest to your east and to your south, and then over in Teton Valley, you have Caribou Targhee National Forest. So as I was saying, a plethora of public lands, a plethora of opportunities to get out on the water to explore. And as a kid growing up in the Southeast, that was mind blowing to me when I moved out here, where you saw some state statistics where, some land masses, like the state of Wyoming, over half of the percentage of the total land mass is public. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think that is what really strikes our region as a really unique place for the DIY angler and the walk-wade angler, is we have a plethora of public lands and a large amount of creeks, streams, and rivers to go fish. My friends in Bozeman, or my friends in Missoula, or my friends on the Missouri River will all sort of, shoot me, but I think we definitely have the best trout fishing in the world. And I'm going to turn my phone on silent, because I'll probably get pinged a little bit for saying that, but I truly believe it. In just that we have. Then you start factoring in some of the lakes, like Jackson Lake at the base of the Tetons, Lee, String, Jenny. We'll go over a couple of those. Yellowstone Lake, I think you've got more water than you know what to do with. in the
What
area.
what kind of what really stands out to me is that not only do you have all this public access, but you also have a great variety of different kinds of water to get into. It's not just that you have amazing blue ribbon, gold medal, very, very prominent trout rivers running through this region. You also have those trout lakes, you have those blue lines, you got those tributaries. I can't really think of a whole lot that this region doesn't offer for anglers, which is really amazing.
No, not at all. I mean, you throw a, a certain mile radius around all of it just to, as a day trip. Um, you could be fishing a true tailwater environment on the lower Henry's Fork,
Hmm.
where you go into a gnarly whitewater canyon of the Teton, which is pushy, that's dropping at a big gradient, lots of pocket water, rapids, boulders, to a pastoral spring creek of the upper Teton,
Right.
a monstrous, sort of freestone uh, tailwater hybrid of the South Fork, and then you come over and you in the Jackson area, and you've got the Snake, which is a true freestone, and then you sprinkle in some Yellowstone National Park to the north. As you said, Eric, it's a bit of everything and all
Yeah.
of it that you want to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, definitely. Very cool.
Um, so a little bit more of the geographical area. You can see that sort of square in the middle of that graphic is Yellowstone National Park. Huge landmass. It was our first national park designated by Teddy Roosevelt. And you'll hear us refer to the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, and just giving you some context to that area. You've got the Bozeman area to the north that includes the Gallatin, the Yellowstone. You go over to the west and you've got the Madison going through the town of Innis. And as you come down on the west side of Yellowstone, you've got Henry's Lake and the start of the Henry's Fork, the Teton, the South Fork of the Snake, and then over into Jackson with Grand Teton National Park there and the Snake, and then over into the east side where you've got Cody, and you've got the Shoshone River and a couple other rivers over in there. But if you that just gives you sort of a geographical image of when I refer to the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. All of that, all of the water itself, which is pretty mind-blowing to me, that starts in our area ends up in the Pacific. So the Snake starts in Yellowstone Park up there south of Yellowstone Lake. It's dammed to form Jackson Lake. And the outflow from Jackson Lake there is the Snake, where it picks up a lot of tributary influence that will go over Pacific Creek, Gros Ventre, Hoback, Salt and the Grays. When the river is dammed on the Idaho-Wyoming state line, there, the reservoir that's created is called Palisades Reservoir. That discharge the name is changed to the South Fork of the Snake. And then when the South Fork of the Snake and the Henry's Fork of the Snake combine, they're around Rexburg. The old timers always refer to the Henry's Fork as the North Fork. And then you have the South Fork. When those come back together there around Rexburg, the name is changed back to the Snake, which journeys all the way to the Columbia, and it's the largest tributary to the Columbia. If any listeners are interested in anadromous fish populations, salmon, steelhead, they continue up the Columbia Basin into the Snake and into the Clearwater, but they will make it all the way up, to the Middle Fork of the Salmon, the town of Salmon, the Passamaquoddy River, but they never really got around the falls of Twin Falls on the Snake, or Shoshone Falls, around there.
Hmm.
But a tremendous ecosystem, a tremendous river, and multitudes of different habitats, fish populations, and everything in between. The Snake River, drainage is very vast, as you can see. It encompasses the vast majority of the state of Idaho, as well as all of Yellowstone National Park and Grand Teton National Park. Here's a little bit more of a tighter screenshot where you can see a little bit more of our local area surrounding Yellowstone National Park there. So this is Yellowstone National Park looking at it from the north. And so you sort of get to see Yellowstone Lake there as the focal point, and there to the right, or to the, that would be the west, you get to see Pitchstone Plateau. And that's where sort of like Old Faithful, the Firehole, the Madison, Those named rivers are there in Yellowstone National Park. You can see the Yellowstone River, which is still the longest undammed river in the United States. It goes from Yellowstone Lake all the way down to the confluence with the Missouri River to the Mississippi. But you've got, this huge landmass of a wild place that truly I think it is very similar to what it was, minus the cars and the cafes and the parking lots of what the early explorers saw, during that time. A very inhospitable place with a lot of wildlife and a lot of dangerous wildlife still to this day,
Mhm.
and very radical weather changing patterns, long cold winters, hot dry summers, shoulder seasons, are very fickle and variable. And it's a true, Western place.
It's cool that
Um,
despite, technology and easier travel and, things like that, that these kinds of places truly do remain that wild. I think that's always fascinating.
I would say so. I think one of the biggest challenges that I think all of us anglers get into as our sport grows and more information becomes more accessible, we get more anglers on the water, right?
Mm.
And as a fly shop owner and outfitter and everything along those lines, you know, I I can't complain because I guess, you could turn that back on me as I'm part of the problem, right? Like sharing all this information for people to go to these places. But at the end of the day, we're all like looking for the same thing, and we should all be able to get along
Hmm.
and enjoy it in our same way. But I think the thing with fly fishing is you still have to go, you still have to cast your fly in the water, and you still
Hmm.
have to go try.
For sure.
And I think that is a big separating factor in the sport of fly fishing and other outdoor recreation sports
Certainly.
in our area. We still have
Yep.
that connection with the fish that
Mhm.
we need, whether it's if it's a qualifying factor of success or not, that is in the DNA of the sport that
Mhm.
we're involved in.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So we're going to start on the west side of the park, namely the Firehole and the Madison. Those fisheries, they tend to start fishing very well early in our season. So historically, the Yellowstone fly fishing season opened the Saturday of the Memorial Day weekend and closed that first weekend in November. There has been some changes to the regulations where there are a couple of rivers now that are open 365 days a year, but most of those fall into that regulation of that season. So, as seasons and fishing opportunities grow, throughout the United States, Yellowstone still is pretty historic in that it has, it's opener trout season and those sort of cultural significant
Hmm.
dates in
Sure.
its angling history. But you're looking at National Park Mountain there on the right, and that was a mountain that Teddy Roosevelt stood on top of, and probably proclaimed, that this was the place to save. I'm not really sure, but you're looking at the Firehole and the Firehole Canyon, and the river to your left is the Gibbon, and so this is the headwaters of the Madison, which is sort of some of the first water that anglers will find as they come in on the west side of the park. It starts fishing very early at that opener of the Saturday of Memorial Day. It usually has a good, month or two window based on how our spring weather goes, and then things quiet down for a bit in midsummer due to low water levels and warm water temperatures, and then they
Hmm.
kick back into gear in the fall. And a lot of that has to come from the thermal influence of the fire hole. I'll show you some other photos coming in, but you've got Old Faithful right there that drains directly into the fire hole. That water's 100, something
Hmm.
degrees. It's definitely not something that you want to touch. And but in those spring days, sometimes if it's snowy and it's crummy, you can definitely put your hands in the water on the fire hole, and it's like it warms you up. It's like bath water. So we'll
Yeah.
see those first hatches of blue wing olives, PMDs, salmon flies, golden stones, and caddis. We see those first on the fire hole and the Madison because of that warmer water influence. This was a rainbow on the gibbon that ate a salmon fly a couple weeks ago
Oh, nice.
on one of our guide trips there. Pretty awesome backdrop, pretty awesome place to be.
Yeah.
And the guide there, Joey Maxim, he always says, or we were just discussing about how one of the challenges in Yellowstone National Park, as we were just discussing, Eric, is how busy it is. And it's
Hmm.
just like getting out of the parking lot. And if you can get out of the parking lot and you can start on down the trail within 50 yards, you're going to have the place to yourself. But you
Yeah.
just have to get through some of those first barriers of people around.
Yeah.
But the fire hole is, it's a very pastoral running river. It doesn't get really deep. It has a lot of weed beds and some structure and things in it. It has very good opportunities at some of those early season dry fly fishing with caddis and blueing olives when we have typical Rocky Mountain spring weather and PMDs like on a spring that we're having right now where it's been very warm and dry. It's also a great river for swinging soft tackles, which is a great technique because it doesn't get very deep. There you can see a little bit more of that thermal influence. That's Ojo Caliente
Sure.
hot spring feeding in. But we like to swing a lot of soft tackles and a lot of small streamers on, intermediate, maybe, a type 3 little sinking poly leader because the river's not very deep and you can cover a lot of water effectively in that 45-degree down and across method. And you can pick up a lot of fish with small streamers, traditional soft tackles like partridge in orange, hare's ear in orange. Anything along those lines can be really productive as you sort of move through the area looking for maybe some risers of eating dry flies and in other surface activity. This is a fish from the Madison that ate a dry dropper. As you get further down into the drainage, you'll start to see, the water in the Firehole Canyon and the Madison start to pick up with turbidity, and it'll pick up as it starts to drop at a steeper gradient, which is a lot of that habitat that stoneflies like
Mm.
salmon flies, golden stones, and yellow sallies.
Yeah.
This was my wife in the fall up on the fire hole swinging soft tackles, brown trout, rainbow trout, all sorts of fish. The fish on the fire hole, they don't get really big. So if you're a big fish person, it's probably not the place to go. But what you can find are rainbow trout and brown trout in a really cool area with a lot of thermal influence, where it feels like you're sort of fishing on the moon a little bit. As you get further down, onto the Madison, the brown trout, they start to get a little bit heftier. You run into more traffic jams, on the road with lots of bison, especially in the springtime. But in the Gibbon and in parts of the Madison, maybe the Firehole, there are some leftover fluvial Arctic grayling that come out of the
Oh,
upper Gibbon meadows that sometimes you'll catch, which is pretty cool because there's not many of those things around in their historic ranges. We'll get more into that with our cutthroats, but that's a bonus fish that you can check the box off in your Yellowstone area. Those are more situated in the upper Gibbon area. But once fall rolls around, all the bison start migrating to the greener grass, the elk start bugling, and the fishing starts to get a little bit better, where you start to see some bigger fish that mostly come out of Hebgen Lake into the Madison, into some of those famous areas like Barnes Hole, Baker's Hole, where we'll target those with nymph rigs, streamers, dead drifting streamers, and things, techniques like that. But you'll start to see those fish in the fall period. And there's usually some rainbows that come up. This is my dad at the confluence of the Madison, or the creation of the Madison, the fire hole in the Gibbon, fishing there. There's always a couple big fish hanging out in that pool. If you pull into the parking lot, that's one to definitely take a poke at. That's on the Madison there. You can see the snow in the background.
mhm.
Definitely getting colder, and that's probably like October. And this is another one of those Madison River rainbows that comes out of Hebgen Lake. I think those fish spawn, sometime in February or March. So they're not necessarily like following the brown trout or like eating their eggs in like an Alaska style. They're sort of just right behind them in their spawning
Mhm.
journey, but you'll
Okay.
bump into a lot more of those fish in the fall time frame as well. Um, you can't talk about Yellowstone National Park without talking about Slough Creek or the Lamar drainage. It's it's reminiscent, or it's commonly called the Serengeti of Yellowstone. It's a huge intact, river valley that hosts a huge amount of wildlife: bison, elk, deer, grizzly bears, wolves, coyotes, you name it. It all lives in that place, and it's a magnificent region in the Yellowstone area. The Slough Creek itself is probably one of the most named fisheries in Yellowstone National Park, and for good reason. You look at the views and the vistas around it, and it's like, who wouldn't want to be there
Yeah,
right now,
absolutely.
the fishing does get more challenging and more technical, namely just the water gets slower, the water gets clearer, fish can
Mhm.
see the flies a little bit better, and in those named rivers you get additional pressure. But as we move out of that rainbow and brown trout area of the western side of the park and move more into the central park part of the park and the northeast corner of the park, you start to get back into our native cutthroat habitat. And for me, cutthroats were always something that I didn't really truly understand when I moved here. I just thought it was just another fish. But as I've gotten to learn more about them and experience them, everywhere that I look around where a cutthroat lives is a pretty beautiful place.
Yeah.
And they were the ones that called this region home before anybody else. And you can go anywhere in the Rocky Mountain West and in the world now and catch rainbow trout and brown trout. But our home is the only place where you can catch native cutthroat habitat. And there's subspecies of cutthroats, don't get me wrong, in areas of Utah and Montana and other areas. But a lot of our area that we fish is still primarily native fish in native habitat, which I think
Yeah.
is super special and unique. So there's a gorgeous Yellowstone cutthroat there from Yellowstone National Park. And you can distinguish the Yellowstone cutthroat by it has less spotting by the head and more spotting down by the tail, rosy cheek, and those slashes underneath the gills. Our other cutthroat that we have is a Snake River fine spotted cutthroat, and I'll point out that pigmentation and that spotting too. But this is a very classic, Slough Creek landscape. Riffle, drop, pool, cut banks. This is late in the summer, early in the fall, as a lot of the vegetation starts to die off. A lot of our summer hatches end. You can still fish a lot of terrestrials, small beetles, ants, and hoppers, as well as really small calabatus, maybe some leftover PMDs, rusty spinners. And if it gets really cold, you'll start to see our blueing olives start to come back online. But you can see bison sort of everywhere. You definitely have to look around every corner of where you are. But Slough Creek is home to some really big cutthroats, but they're really smart. You can see that one there. But a lot of like slower, slack water, as you can see behind the angler in that
Mhm.
photo of what you'd see. So a lot of crawling on your knees, a lot of head hunting, a lot of long leaders, light tippets, a different style of fishing than you would see on that western side of the park. Here's the
Yeah, I was
low.
going to
Yeah.
ask you actually, Mike, what kind of rod or reel setup you're bringing in with you for this slightly different kind of water up there in the park.
Sure. This one, a 9 foot 5 weight, 9 foot
Hmm.
4 weight, if you wanted to get a little bit more technical,
Okay,
floating
cool.
line. And then I think what would be more important there is to have, a different, good selection of different diameters of tippet, and different lengths of leaders for different applications. Because you may, be fishing like Soda Butte Creek, like what's behind my buddies in this photo, and you're fishing something a little bit more freestone, a 7.5 foot leader with a hopper and a dropper is all you need. And then
Hmm.
maybe you go back to the truck and you eat lunch and have a couple beers and hang out and you want to go hit lower Slough Creek. And then it's like, I need a 12-foot leader tapered to
Right.
5X or maybe
Yeah.
something else.
Cool.
But a little bit different than that western side of the park where it's
Right.
probably 9 foot 4 weight, 9 foot 5 weight, but it's not as technical on the or
Okay.
tactical in the dry fly
Right.
fishing.
Yeah, for sure.
Um,
Cool.
but this is looking up Soda Butte Creek, which is a tributary to the Lamar, that also hosts a large number of cutthroats, and a very wild and scenic place where you could probably spend a lifetime in there.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
definitely there's a high population of grizzly bears. Anywhere you go in Yellowstone National Park or the greater Jackson Hole region. So carry your bear spray. It never ceases to amaze me. We have customers that come into our fly shop every summer and they say, "Oh man, this is $40. Do I really need it?" And you're like, "Well, I would pay $40 to have a little bit of confidence and protection in the backcountry."
For
Um,
sure.
because the grizzly population is very alive and well, as
Mhm.
we saw walking around a bunch on Lower Slough Creek. This is the Lower Lamar. Still a lot of that classic riffle drop
Mhm.
pool. The Lamar is really cool because it has a lot of petrified wood and a lot of fossils and stuff that come out of that drainage.
Cool.
So you see a lot of petrified stuff in the river bottom, and all sorts of funky um, different geological formations. If you're into rocks and things like that, you'll see a little bit of everything in that Lamar drainage.
Yep.
But Soda Butte Creek, as I was saying, it's got some classic cutthroat fishing, um, technical dry flies, long leaders, big skies, big mountains around. It's a phenomenal place, and it's definitely a place that I would recommend going in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. It also has some rainbows in the lower portion of the river that can hybridize like this fish that form sort of a cut bow,
Hmm.
which is a cross between a rainbow and a cutthroat. There are, one thing to keep in mind if you do come and fish in our area, there is a lot of different regulations, especially in Yellowstone, in support of native fish, where there are some areas where harvesting of fish is encouraged. It's something to take a look at with the regs of before you head out on the water in a different area. But I think my biggest recommendation in fishing in Yellowstone is um, don't try to bite off more than you can chew. It's a huge place,
Yeah.
and it will take you longer to get from one side to the other than you think. If you don't live in the area or have that experience in Yellowstone, you'll look and you'll be like, "Oh, it's only 40 miles." And you're like, "Oh, I do 40 miles on my commute, home to work in my sleep, or my
Mhm.
car basically drives me now." But with us, the roads are windy, they're two lane. There's very few places to pass. And the speed limit for good reason is 45 or 55 miles an hour to protect wildlife and to keep you, from buzzing through the place so fast that you don't necessarily enjoy it. So if it were me and I was making a recommendation on a Yellowstone fishing, trip with some buddies or something like that, I would pick one area of the park. I would concentrate on it for 3, 5 days, enjoy it, and then you know, the next year pick something else, or maybe take one of
Yeah.
those days to do a big drive and go look at something else, because we have a lot of people that call and say, "Hey, I want to go fishing in Yellowstone and I want to go and do this tomorrow." And it's it's um it's a bigger adventure than you can bite off and chew in a day or two.
Yeah,
A
for
lot of
sure. I
our
think
I'm sorry,
that's
go
a.
ahead.
I was just gonna say I'm looking at the park here in trout routes right now, and I see a lot of opportunities to access some water, but also that it is incredibly massive. I mean, I could imagine you could spend a lifetime just in the park, and you would never cover near half of the opportunities that are available to you. So I love that idea of trying to isolate or hone in on a particular area and make that sort of your base camp or branch out from that to really get to know that part of the park and using trout routes to even help plan some of that out, I think would be a great idea. Help you not only get your bearings, but then drop some markers and save some of these access points so you've got these resources at hand. So when you get out there and it feels much bigger than you anticipated, you can still be confident that you know where you're headed, you know what water you're going to fish, you've got some notes on the techniques or the gear, and everything right there in your pocket.
100%. I think, the biggest tragedy would be you spend all this time doing this research and getting out to this place, and you spend all your time driving.
Yeah,
right?
right.
And
Absolutely.
or fooling around trying to figure out where to go. And
Yeah,
I
definitely.
think trout routes is an incredible tool at that point to narrow in your shot group a little bit of
Mhm.
like, what do
Right,
you want to
right.
do? Where do you want to go? And then you can reach out to an outfitter or fly shop like myself or somebody else in the region, and they can dial you in further of sort of what's going on.
Definitely. Yeah,
I'm going to
yeah.
touch a little bit on Yellowstone Lake. Yellowstone Lake is the highest, it's the largest high alpine lake in the United States, and it's one of the it's pretty darn deep, somewhere around 490 or 480, feet deep. It's massive, and historically it had a robust cutthroat population until about, the 90s, 2000s, when they started discovering some lake trout in higher numbers and higher densities in Yellowstone National Park. I'm not going to get into where they came from or what they are or anything like that because I don't think anybody truly knows the story. But I bring that up because over time, a lot of the fish, like the one on the screen, has been taken out of the lake in a lake trout suppression effort to boost our native cutthroat populations, to eventually come back. And it has been working, to an
Cool.
extent where you would see some of the fish, and when they'd be cleaned open or necropsied for data or anything like that, you would find small cutthroats, you would find other forage fish and things like that. So we're starting to see the pendulum shift a little bit back to our native fish populations. But if you want to go do something totally off the wall and have the place to yourself, Yellowstone Lake is definitely one of those places. It's massive, it can be dangerous, but when you get out there, you usually can have the place to yourself. It gets phenomenal bug hatches, calabatus, sedge hatches, anything, any of those stillwater mayflies, or excuse me, stillwater bugs, and fish eat, leeches and small streamers and things like that in the springtime. But this is on the east side of the lake, over there next to the guard station. This is sort of a funny sign of bear and wolf petting area, and bears there as well. But a very robust cutthroat population that I think is growing, a lot of them in that 14 to 16 inch range, that
Cool.
and some that get, sort of even bigger. That it's definitely a fishery that's back on the rise, which is good to hear in the cold water, trout fishing world of, native populations regaining their place in an area. But in this was, in June. It looks like, probably March or February for some of y'all tuning in,
Yeah.
but that was the beginning of our summer, which is normal, but really robust, big cutthroats. It's a great place to do some backcountry camping, backpacking. I would leave the piece of like sea kayaking or boating up to your own professional skill level, because as you can see, it's a massive piece of water. It is
Hmm.
very cold, and the weather changes very quickly. But it's definitely one of those diamonds in the rough of a fishery, that once was very prolific that is now coming back. That was my wife with a 26-inch cutthroat a couple springs
Awesome.
ago, which was,
Yeah.
one of the biggest cutthroats that we've seen out of that area. But as we head down south of Yellowstone, and start to enter the Jackson area in Grand Teton National Park, I think it's a good reminder, that one of the greatest features that we have in trout routes is the ability to download your map offline, right? And we've become so dependent on our phones that, the area of Grand Teton National Park and Yellowstone National Park is still a very wild place, and you don't get cell phone service everywhere,
Hmm.
which is great. It's what makes our experiences in the backcountry and on the water super special. But if you are reliant on, GPS or mapping, definitely check that out. And it's one of the great features there of trout routes, where you can, you get to your hotel, hook into the Wi-Fi, get your maps downloaded for your adventures, before you head out and you start your walkway or anything along those lines.
Yeah, 100%.
Um, but the Snake, it flows, north to south, starting out of Grand Teton National Park, we sort of went through that in the sort of Snake River Basin. But an iconic fishery in Wyoming and the Rocky Mountain West, where you've got cutthroats, dry flies, and the Grand Tetons in the background.
Yeah.
So
So
it's
cool.
definitely hard to beat. A lot of cutthroats, some walk wade fishing opportunities there on riffles, shoals, side channels, riprap, cottonwood banks. It's a true freestone sort of there in its own environment. It has a lot of really healthy cutthroats. Its system is totally intact, really great bug life, most notably blue-wing olives, PMDs, caddis, all of the stoneflies, hoppers and terrestrials. And we also get a bunch of Classinia stoneflies, which is like a mutant stone that we get in the fall that can be really cool and fun fishing in there. But as the Snake sort of flows down, it starts to enter more of the whitewater canyon where a lot of the whitewater rafters go. You get, some brown trout sprinkled in there, but another place to get off the beaten path of the normal drift boat route is booking a trip, in that whitewater section where you fish a lot of dry flies, you fish a lot of dry droppers. The Snake doesn't harbor a huge population of fish that are really big, but the fish like dry flies a lot,
Yeah.
which we really like too.
Yeah. Awesome.
And we also get a really good squala hatch there in the springtime, depending
Yeah.
on our river conditions and our weather conditions, where we can have some pretty epic dry fly fishing there at the end of ski season. So if you're coming out and you're packing your skis and you're coming on spring break, throw your fly rod and your
Yeah.
waders in there too, because it can be pretty fun as well. As you look at sort of the Jackson area, you've got you can notice a lot of tributaries that feed into the Snake. And the Snake is a highly tributary oriented river, starting with Pacific Creek to the north, the Buffalo Fork, the Gros Ventre, the Hoback to the south, and then you've got the Salt and the Grays, and I'm just harping again on the plethora of opportunities for anglers to get out on the water in their own way. This is the Buffalo Fork River, gorgeous tributary to the Snake, harbors a lot of wildlife, a lot of bears, grizzly bears, black bears, a lot of wolves. It's a truly wild place as it borders the Teton Wilderness, area up there by Turpin Meadow Ranch. But it's got, some phenomenal dry fly fishing and a little bit more of a freestone environment where you get rocks, pools,
Mhm.
logs, structure, rock walls, and that fishing, which is sort of counterintuitive to what a lot of people would think coming out to our area, is the dry fly fishing only gets better as it gets hotter and further into the summer, because the drainage itself is located at such a high altitude that it takes a long time for those water temperatures
Right.
to get to that level where you may see
Okay.
them lower in the drainage systems, peaking in different times. But lots of fast pocket water, lots of fun dry fly fishing there for cutthroats, and all fish of all sizes, but some really awesome sized fish in a really like small fish environment that
Yeah,
people can
totally.
have a lot of fun with.
Yeah, I think that's really
Um,
interesting too. The other thing I was just going to throw out there for everyone following along is if you're headed out to this part of the country in that peak summer, hot weather, keep some of those tributaries in mind, because you'll be able to get into some really good fishing despite warmer air temps. And it sounds like, because they're at such high elevation, it takes a long time for it to warm up. You can have some really good water temps, even if some other parts of the area are getting really, really warm.
That's a great reminder. We all know trout need cool, clean water that has a lot of oxygen in it. And as you head further upstream towards the source, you eventually will find that in some type of
Mm.
highly aerated water or colder water, because it's coming out of a more remote basin, that can help sort of shift the pressure around on our
Sure.
fisheries. That's important.
Yeah,
This
definitely.
is another classic tributary hike in the greater Jackson area. I took this photo 19 yeah, almost like 19 something years ago with my lab and whatnot. But Crystal Creek, great meadow stream, hike into a tributary of the Gros Ventre, lots of cutthroats, fun dry fly fishing. It gets a really great fall drake hatch that we really love. And fall meaning like the first couple weeks of September here when things start to cool down. But a little bit different of an environment, a little bit more pastoral, a little bit more meadowy with willows and riffles, less like big boulder and plunge pools and habitat like that. But as I said, now you can see the difference in the Snake River fine spotted cutthroat than the Yellowstone. You see the smaller dotting and markings all the way to the head, and it's pretty uniform throughout the entire fish and even like down into its tail. But again, lots of wade fishing opportunities for a lot of different angling pursuits in different places. This fish was from the Snake above Jackson Lake, right at the south border of Yellowstone, that offers a really quick, easy way to get in and do some walk wade fishing, anytime during the summer of what you want to do. And then starting to touch on some of those alpine lakes that we talked about. This is a lake that I heard that a biologist told me back in the day, and I have not like verified this, but this lake is full of Arctic grayling, which is sort of weird, and it's not necessarily a native species to our area. But back in the day, they were stocking a lot of these high alpine lakes with Arctic grayling to start restocking processes in the West. So, namely, like the Big Hole, the Madison, the Gibbon, and some of those areas that had native grayling populations. But yeah, I mean, a great way to spend, a hot summer day getting off the river and hiking to a high alpine lake, catching a bunch of grayling and different
Oh,
fish
cool.
to do something different. They eat dry flies, they eat streamers, they eat all sorts of stuff.
I'm going to
But
throw
for,
another
yeah,
quick trout routes plug in here because we've actually mapped a fair number of these trout lakes, and it's sometimes a bit of a hidden feature. But if you open up your map filters and scroll down, there's a toggle to turn on trout lakes, and it'll show you with a blue circle marker where some of those locations are. And I would bet that quite a number of these in this area are already mapped, so could give you some inspiration if you're looking for some of those kind of off the beaten path pursuits.
there are tons of them, and that's a great reminder, Eric. And as like everybody gets congregated on wanting to fish like the big named water, a lot
Right.
of these should be mixed into any angler's pursuits when they come out here just to see something different and see something new. And you usually can have the place to yourself. Like
Yeah.
fall on Jackson Lake, it's a massive lake. It's a huge piece of water. Lake trout spawn in the fall, and so you can get after them, with fly rods, sinking lines on calm days, there once again, but, not a boat around me, just another one of those opportunities of going to a different place at a different time and doing, something new.
Yeah.
Jenny Lake at the base of the Tetons is another great fishery for anglers. You could probably do it in a smaller craft than like Jackson Lake, a drift boat, maybe a canoe. But once again, I would be very careful. It's very deep and our weather changes. But that's my dad in the fall with some lake trouts. There's also a lot of cutthroats. We eat a lot of lake trout with fish tacos too,
There you go.
that we enjoy. They're technically an invasive species with an encouraged harvest behind them and a certain slot limit, which is another one of those reminders, as I was just saying, of just checking the regulations of
Yep,
wherever you go, when you go.
definitely.
But another beautiful lake that has cutthroats and lake trout. In the summertime, you can have phenomenal terrestrial fishing early in the morning with hoppers, beetles, and ants. You can fish it in a very traditional lake style pattern with sinking lines and leeches.
Hmm.
And once again, it's one of those places you can sort of have on your own, which is a super special thing in the Rocky Mountain West in these days. But also a really good population of cutthroats that I was saying that eat dry flies. You can have surface activity, all sorts of fun there on Jenny Lake. There's a smaller lake trout there from midsummer. So a little bit of everything, board shorts and flip flops and sun hoodies to bibs and
Right.
stocking caps, right? You just
Yeah, absolutely.
you got to bundle up and go.
Yeah, dress in layers.
Namely, one of the most prolific and like fun fisheries and notable fisheries in the town of Jackson is Flat Creek. It's a real big spring creek that runs through the National Elk Refuge there from the Grovaunt down into town. It's a very technical fishery. It can be fun. It can be incredibly rewarding, but equally as frustrating and frustrating and challenge, your angling attitude and aptitude all at once. Very slow moving water, very technical style fishing, long leaders, light tippets, awesome hatches of PMDs, drakes, terrestrials in the summertime. And then by the time it closes, it's on a shorter season there like that. It's only open August, let's see, August 1st through November there, that it's closed to protect spawning cutthroats. So you only really get the summer hatches in the beginning of the
Okay.
fall hatches there. But a lot
Yeah.
of great cutthroat fishing. You can see it gets really small in some places, a lot
Mhm.
of undercut banks, great places for cutthroats to hide to ambush hoppers, or maybe even eat, a crane fly or any bug. But a lot of crawling, a lot of, casting downstream. So the fish sees the fly first. But an awesome little cutthroat fishery that is perfect for a couple hours here or a couple hours there if you need to sneak out and get your fly fishing fix of just sort of being on the water in the greater Jacksonville area. There's a couple other, smaller spring creeks there in Grand Teton National Park, Blacktail Ponds. There's Frustration Ponds and a couple other ones that bubble up straight out of the aquifer that have some really technical and fun cutthroat fishing, to be had in those. And another one of those that you could just mix in, for a couple hours each day if you were out with the family or, had the kids
Right.
or anything. But, recreating in Grand Teton National Park, it's always a good reminder, to stop and look around,
Yeah.
because the views are really awesome.
Yeah, I was gonna
Oh,
say if you took those mountains out of the background, that looks a little bit like some of the water that I got here in my backyard. Very technical,
yeah.
a lot of undercut banks. You gotta really sneak up on the fish, but I don't quite have the luxury of that vista in the background all the time.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you can't take it for granted. Every time you see it, you just got to, stop
Yeah.
and soak it in. So rounding out our other rivers, and I'm finishing up so we can get to the Q&A and the real important stuff of answering questions from everyone. But as I said, the other big named rivers in our area are the South Fork of the Snake, which is a very large river. It flows somewhere between 11,000 and 16 to 18,000 CFS in the summertime. It has phenomenal hatches. It is sort of like has trout population similar to the Green, the Bighorn. It's just a robust trout fishery with lots of aquatic life. It's an incredible fishery starting, now from the spring through the fall. Salmon flies, golden stones, drakes, PMDs, terrestrials. Um, our mutant stoneflies there at the end of summer, beginning of fall, and then our blueing olive fishing there into the fall can be phenomenal. It's also home to our overnight camp that I was talking about, the South Fork Hilton. These are some of our client tents that we have down there, complete, on the river. We have a cook down there that cooks great meals for everybody, and it's only accessible by boat. And that's a 2-day float trip, one night stay, sort of at our South Fork Hilton with a spread and everything. It's a super fun trip with lots of campfires. Brown trout, cutthroat trout, both subspecies of cutthroat trout, as well as rainbow trout in the South Fork of the Snake, and rainbow cutthroat hybrids, those cut bows that we were talking about. So you sort of get the best of all of the trout worlds in that regard. The Teton in our valley, it flows south to north. It starts as a very pastoral, slow-moving spring creek with lots of cutthroats and dry fly fishing opportunities, more in a technical aspect. But then it drops off into that big gnarly canyon where we have lots of white water, lots of pocket water, big dry fly fishing, foam flies, built for cutthroats and things of that nature that can be a lot of fun in the middle of the summertime. There you can see big columnar basalt and cliff walls, and all sorts of fun different habitat there. And then the Henry's Fork, as we started, one of those most notable fisheries for dry fly anglers, and any trout angler out there knows about it. From the bottom portions there around Ashton that are pretty wide and tailwater oriented, as you can see at that photo, to the lower Mesa stretch where there's a lot of whitewater, great salmon fly hatch in there, to the ranch up there at the top that opens on June 15th, which is sort of the PhD of fly fishing in the Box Canyon. Top to bottom, the Henry's Fork is probably one of our most unique fisheries sort of in our area. So I know I went through it all pretty quick, but I wanted to say thanks for tuning in. And I know you probably drank from the trout fishing fire hose right there, but I wanted to reserve some time for everybody to ask some questions and get some information on just fishing in the Yellowstone area. And thanks for tuning in and thanks for having me, Eric.
Mike, that was fantastic. I know I learned a ton. I certainly feel much better oriented in that area. I can get a better sense of what kinds of opportunities there are, in and around both Yellowstone and in the park, and then in that Jackson Hole area. And I mean, again, you touched on this right at the top of the conversation, and we hit it a few times throughout. I'm still blown away by the amount, not only the amount of water, but then the amount of variety of opportunities that are available to folks in this region. It's just incredible.
It's amazing. And you sort of get caught in, us anglers, we're creatures of habit, right? Like we like doing things a certain way and whatnot. And I find myself like season after season where it's sort of like you get into a groove of something. And I think that's true for any trout angler. And it really harbors itself to us out here because you could get into lake fishing one year and then you could be like,
For
man, I
sure.
just want to get out of the drift boat and go wade fish small creeks with a two
Yeah.
weight and a dry fly and a puck of flies and a backpack and my bear spray and a water bottle. You can do that for a summer. And then
Mhm.
you can say, I want to row whitewater, and you can do that for summer. So yes, we are incredibly blessed and fortunate to have what we have in our backyard for our fisheries. I couldn't say that enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you a ton for sharing all that information with us. I know I'm probably going to go back and watch this recording a couple times just to
Yeah.
to see everything that I might have missed. Matt, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to drop in that link for everyone for our giveaway. And while folks are doing that, actually, Matt, if there's anything you wanted to just let folks know about that link, I'll let you jump in real quick.
Yeah, real quick. Link should be pretty easy. I am going to drop it in right now, so let me know if you all don't see that. And you'll just need to drop in your email there, and then tomorrow, Eric or myself will reach out to you and let you know if you've won, and we'll connect with you further from there. But let me know if you all cannot see that link and or cannot respond. Just waiting for those responses to come in.
While we're giving folks a chance to do that, Mike, I'm just curious if there's anything you wanted to highlight here in this box. I mean, with all the different kinds of water, I imagine, you're choosing a number of different flies depending on what your pursuit is. But if there's anything in here that you recall or anything like that that you would want to call out, I'd love to hear any thoughts you have there. There's, like I said, there's a huge variety. We've got a bunch of dry flies, we've got some streamers, all kinds of nymphs, some terrestrials, hoppers, stoneflies. I mean, this box really does. I don't know how well folks are going to be able to see that, but this really does kind of run the spectrum of just about everything you could imagine.
I think one of if I had to sort of narrow it down, one of the most important flies in our area would be a nymph pattern, and it's called the Pat's rubber legs. And
Totally.
it, as stone flies, they exist in a multitude of different sizes. They exist in a multitude of different shapes and different colors. They molt. They do different things. Different biomasses of different rivers have different colorations in the water and things like that. So those are something I would always have in my fly box, from the size 4 that you would fish during the salmon flies down to the size 8 or 10 that you would fish maybe for goldens or
Mhm.
that Classinia mutant stone fly that we have. That would be one of the number ones. The other nymph that I probably would throw in there would either be, a tungsten jig pheasant tail or a Duracell. If you wanted something um, natural and traditional, or if you wanted something bright and flashy, those would be my recommendations for the nymphs. For a dry fly, a parachute Adams, during our prime dry fly fishing season in a price, some different colors, especially on creeks and streams, or a parawolf that has some more buoyancy can be really
Mhm.
effective. Your classic parachute caddis is another really effective pattern, for smaller creeks and streams around here. And then, maybe like a general gray drake or a green drake, because we do get those in the spring, and then we do get a fall hatch of it's called a hecubid drake that you can fish again. Those fish will look for those,
Okay.
throughout the season. Foam flies, the Dornan's water walker, which is a salmon fly or a stonefly pattern, a Schroeder's parachute hopper, and then probably a classic Chernobyl ant or a Chernobyl bug can get you around, in gold, tan, or yellow can get you around for most of the area to get it done.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Right on. Awesome. Well, we do have some questions to run through. We'll see how many we can get through here, and we'll try to make our way through them quickly. First one is, if you had to choose one place to go in Yellowstone for walking meadow streams and creeks, where might that like generally be?
If it was in the spring or the fall, I would pick the Firehole or Madison or Gibbon, just based on the seasonality of it. If it was midsummer, early fall, I would look at um, the Lamar, Slough Creek, Soda Butte Creek, Pebble Creek, in some of those areas. I think you definitely have to keep in mind the seasonality of when you're going to be there and which rivers are going to be fishing the best, but also what is best for our trout friends in water temperatures, water levels, and pressure.
Yep. Great reminder, which you can all check before you go out using the gauges tool within the Travel Routes app.
Yeah, yeah.
Next one, any quick tips for fishing the Big Thompson?
Big Thompson. Don't know it much. I think it's in Colorado.
I think so. There we go. Keep moving. I think we had one question come in, but where you got those maps that you were using in the slides, the map images, was that just a Google Images pull, or was that
Yeah,
something you use often?
pull it from the Google
I
machine.
like it. There we
The
go.
the resources are at everybody's fingertips these days. Or you can pull them from Trout Routes if you use the desktop version or Google Maps, anything like that.
There we go.
Of course, a good plug, but I was going to throw out too, using that 3D maps layer. This would be a really cool application to be able to sort of fly yourself down through that valley and see really what all that topography is doing.
Totally.
Awesome. Next one. Have you ever had a run-in with a grizz?
Thank goodness, no. But I've seen plenty of them, and like I was saying, I always carry my bear spray. But I've never had an actual time or use to use it, and I hope to keep it that way. It has actually been used more for aggressive moose, busting through the willows or something
Sure.
like that. That's a different master class. And you can always have it in your back pocket for angry tourists that don't like what you're saying. So,
There we go. Next one. Any quick info you can share on the thoroughfare region?
boy, that's a tough one to get into. You have to be committed. And if it were me and I was trying to get in there, I would hire somebody with some stock or a horse packer, which I'd be happy to recommend some people that I do know. And I think the timing is of the crucial nature of getting in there, because the thoroughfare region, for those that don't know it, is sort of the headwaters of Yellowstone Lake. So you would be targeting cutthroat trout coming out of Yellowstone Lake to spawn in that river. So it's not really something you want to go and do in like August, because I've heard the fish just aren't there. So
Sure.
timing is something that you would definitely want to look at. Or there are boat shuttles that go across Yellowstone Lake, or you could do the long walk. But if it were me, I would save up some money and I would do the horse packing piece. So then when I got my boots on the ground and I was fishing, I wasn't just so worked from walking, 20 something miles.
Sure.
And you want to talk about a wild place that has a lot of grizzly bears. That's one of them.
Fair. Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. Um, Quick question for you on floating. What water works for a 9-foot pontoon boats?
So like I'm assuming that's like a little fish cat or something along those lines.
Yeah, I'm sure. Maybe let's see. It's Greg Young who asked that one, so maybe he can add a little bit more color on the question, and we can swing back to
You
that
know,
one.
I would dependent all of these are going to be premised on like your ability of maneuvering the boat and what's your comfort zone, right?
Sure. Sure.
My recommendation would be to probably first time out, if you were using a watercraft like that, I would stay away from anything that has steeper gradient. Um, and so that would naturally lean towards the upper Teton River, and then the vast majority of the sections of the Henry's Fork would be very you know, forgiving in for a fish cat or something like that. I
Cool.
also would have it to go fish Jenny Lake and a couple of those other places. And if you look on your map and the trout routes, there's a couple places there in Yellowstone Lake, especially in the West Thumb, that where you could launch it and fish very close, have your wits about you, you know, with a sinking line or something like that, and you could probably see some cool stuff doing that too. But once again, all of those layers, you know, safety, your proficiency, weather, and conditions will play into those.
Sure. Cool. Next one. Other than bears and bugs, any other crawling critters to worry about walking the edges of the waters?
No, not really. That's, you
Okay.
know, we're a little too cold for most like big poisonous snakes and spiders and stuff. So it's a pretty hospitable place if you factor out the grizzly bears and the wolves and you know, the as I was saying, moose can get really aggressive, especially around young and their calves. That's something
Mhm.
to definitely be aware of.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. So are some of the upper mountain freestone streams up high going to be accessible earlier than normal this year, are you thinking?
I would say this year, yes. Historically, I always said that the snake in Jackson usually starts to clear and fish consistently there around the end of June, beginning of July. Now, naturally, you know, like this year we had an average snowpack, but our month of May was really warm and we had our snow melt rates were 2x of normal. So we're seeing areas like the Teton, tributaries to the Snake, start to clear and fish probably a little bit earlier than they would. I would say you probably wouldn't find the most consistent fishing in a lot of those walk wade areas really early in the season just because they're high, cold, and you know they could be a little bit unstable. If it were me, I would look for some of those medium-sized rivers to fish um, you know, during that time, instead of like the really small creeks and streams. I tend to save those for the end of July and the month of August and the beginning of September.
Sure, sure. Um, how about the Gross Venture and Hoback drainages? Any tips, tricks? Sounds like we've got an attendee who would love to catch a big cutthroat.
Both of those places are great for the DIY angler. The Grovant has a lot more public land than the Hoback does. So that would be something you would want to check out a land ownership map or the layers in trout routes of where you're going, you know, anything of that nature. You know, the Grovant, both of those, the Grovant is basically you can drive as far as you want until the road ends and you can fish most to all of it. The Hoback, it winds along the highway, so it's the spots are a little bit more limited in where you can and can't go. But the Hoback is comprised of a lot of bedrock and it's comprised of a lot of shelf rock, which stoneflies like a lot. And so if the timing is right, you can see some of the densest salmon fly hatches that we have in our area on the Hoback. That would be something I would keep in mind going to fish the Hoback. And then on the Grovant, I think it's, you know, it's just finding likely holding water and finding a pull out or something where somebody hasn't been and walk around and enjoy it. You know, Crystal Creek is another tributary to the Grovant that offers a really good day hike experience to fish for cutthroats too.
Right on. Awesome. What are we looking at for rules when it comes to stream bed access laws and floating through private land in Idaho?
So the state of Idaho is the public is granted access through the high water mark, very similar to the state of Montana, almost identical. So if you could technically do it safely, you could walk, from the source to the end if you wanted to and not trespass.
Sure.
Wyoming is very similar to Colorado, where the landowner owns the stream bed and riparian area. So you've got two states that fish very similarly, but with two drastically different rules of something to be very aware of if you're bringing a boat up here to float. The good news is a lot of the stuff in the direct Jackson area, especially the Snake, you've got Grand Teton National Park, which is all public. There may be certain regulations of where you should or can or cannot get out of the boat. You've got, a large stretch of BLM, Bureau of Reclamation, checkerboarded in with a little bit of private. And then as it leaves that area, it goes into Bridger Teton National Forest that is all public land as well. So you don't necessarily have to be as aware of it on, say, the Snake than you would in some of the areas of other parts of Wyoming.
All right, next one. What do we got here? Focusing on the west side of the park, any day hike recommendations that it might include some smaller streams?
Yeah, there is like Grayling Creek and I think Cub Creek and a couple of those other tributaries that go in to the Madison or feed into Hebgen Lake that can be really good. There, that west side of the park has a lot of bears too, so that's definitely something that I would be aware of. The Gibbon Meadows, you can get away from people there, as well as, some of that area around Gibbon Falls and Firehole Falls that people don't necessarily fish a lot of. But that basin doesn't hold a lot of water. So you don't get a lot of those little creeks and tribs that maybe you would get in the northeast corner with the Lamar and Slough. You're going to be a little bit more limited there.
Sure. Cool. Next one. If you had to choose, what is the best area of the park to wade in Yellowstone?
Mm. I, I, my favorite is definitely the Lamar and Slough Creek. I don't know. I mean, man, there's a lot. I mean,
So
there's,
I knew it'd be tough.
yeah, I would say, if the Madison Fire Hole, I mean, the Yellowstone around Lahardy Rapids is very iconic, but I just get that true like Western wow factor every time I fish Slough Creek or the Lamar. It's just such an iconic place. It's undeniably gorgeous, and it's undeniably like somewhat of the same as it was with the cutthroat population there. So I would say that.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Somebody, Keith asked, he was there last year when the firehole and the Madison were closed due to warm water temperatures.
Mhm.
Is that normal every year? Is that becoming more normal? Talk to us a little bit about some of those hoot owls that you guys experience over the summer.
I would say it's becoming a little bit more normal, which is unfortunate.
Yeah,
And I don't know if we necessarily have like the scientific data or support that it's like it's officially changing, or we have so many eyes and so much technical data on everything that we know that we're just more aware of it. I think it's a mix of
sure.
all of it. But our summers are getting hotter, our winters are getting drier, and as I was explaining, the Firehole and the Madison are susceptible to high water temperatures with the thermal influence. Um, that would be a great time to fish, the Gibbon below Gibbon Falls, where there's that highly oxygenated water and a lot of turbidity and a lot of area like of that. The Yellowstone itself can fish well during that time, especially the stuff more closer towards Gardner. And you're in that classic window of Slough Creek and Soda Butte Creek. But
Sure.
yeah, the Firehole and the Madison, like their blessing is they fish really early because they have those warmer water temps, but its curses, they're
Yep.
susceptible to that.
Yep. Euro nymphing. Effective in Yellowstone, not effective. How do you feel? What's your thoughts on Euro nymphing some of that Yellowstone water?
I think it would be very difficult in a place like the Firehole because it's very weedy and shallow, and I don't think it would be very productive with those water conditions. It could be very productive in the Madison, especially Baker's Hole or Barnes Hole, where you have more of a steady gradient and the rock that you would need in that Euro nymphing um, style. Um, and then, so I think that would be the place that I would recommend if that was your technique that
Sure.
you wanted to
Sure.
use. But cutthroats like eating dry flies. So uh, don't don't get stuck in the Euro nymphing if you come around the corner and a cutthroat's eating a PMD. You know, that's
True.
I mean
True.
it's that's the classic, Yellowstone experience. So don't snub on the dry flies.
Um, any specific advice on Yellowstone the second week of September or sometime around September?
Yeah, depending on what our weather's doing, you can probably start to see some of our first fall weather, cool days and cool nights, where the Firehole and the Madison may come back online, depending on the weather that we're having. You may see some of those first fish coming out of Hebgen Lake into the Madison. You may start to see some blueing olives at that time. If it's really hot and dry, I would move back over to that northeast corner of the park and concentrate on, um, PMDs and terrestrials at that time on Lamar, Slough Creek, Soda Butte Creek, you know. And you've also got like the Lewis River and Lewis Lake and the Upper Snake that can start to fish at those times. But in honesty, September can be looking into a crystal ball a little bit. It's very weather and condition based. In my fishing reports, I always write, when we move into the end of August, into the months of September, you should have every fly box that you own with every bug,
There we
because I've
go.
seen it snow and I've seen, you could still be wearing flip-flops and shorts and fishing summer bugs, or you could be fishing fall bugs, or maybe you need to plug it in between with terrestrials, with hoppers, beetles, ants, crane flies, and stuff of that nature.
Sure. Cool. Speaking of flies, any fly recommendations for the Henry's Fork, specifically near Island Park in August, early August?
Sure, I would have PMDs. So a mix of, parachute adults, rusty spinners, and a good selection of cripples or emergers. For your nymph, I would probably carry some type of pheasant tail variant or a bullet quill or a perdigon or something in darker shades like a pheasant tail styled fly. You might see some hoppers and some terrestrials start up there. The ranch, it gets like a little cinnamon ant, like termite honey ant, that can be really effective up there around last chance. Small hoppers, small beetles, and then the ever-present rubber leg nymph if you wanted to fish it as a dropper or you wanted to fish it during like the midday warm parts of the day. You could fish, your rubber leg stonefly imitation with a small pheasant tail and probably do pretty darn good too.
Sounds like lots of options. I like it. All right, I know we're coming up on time, so we're gonna try to cruise through some of these last ones here. Um, Getting only one opportunity a year to fish. Is there a good place in Yellowstone to go fish or to avoid? Maybe this is even a better question, or to avoid during August.
Well, a, a place to fish or avoid in August, huh? I think, that is from from mid June till about Labor Day. It's Christmas Day every day here for a trout angler, you know. So I think your expectations need to be in line where I am going to see people and there's going to be a lot of people fishing, right? Can't blame them. We're all going to be one of them, right?
Yep. Yep.
And so I am a big proponent of that time of year of putting on the backpack, packing a lunch, and hitting some small creeks and tributaries that are a little bit more off the beaten path than maybe the normal pull-offs that you'll see,
Sure.
in that area. So that's when I like, areas of the Buffalo Fork, and dependent on, or were we talking about Yellowstone? I'm sorry.
Yellowstone specifically was kind
Okay.
of, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So um, that would be the time where it would be like I want to be up early and I want to be on the trail really early, and I probably will be done fishing for a little bit like around lunchtime. Or I'm going to reverse it and I'm going to let everybody get their fill in the morning, and then I'm going to go late and fish until, I got to put my headlamp on. And I'm
Sure.
just going to get off of that normal like 9 to 5, like that everybody else is going to be, to hopefully harbor, a little bit of solitude and having the place on my own. I normally that time of year will err towards the morning time just because water temperatures are going to be cooler and I want to be the first ones to the fish, right?
There we go.
Type
Makes
thing.
sense.
So getting your boots on the ground, hiking, way up the Lamar, getting up into the second or the third meadow of the thoroughfare can be really productive. I usually will leave some of that water down by the campground and just sort of walk by it because I know that there's been a lot of people, fishing in there and sort of, mucking it up a best, or they've probably seen a lot of fish have seen a lot of pressure,
Sure.
during that time. So, and also again, dependent on flows, you've got Soda Butte and you've got Pebble Creek, which are tributaries to the Lamar that can offer, some places to walk around and get away from. If it is August, I probably would stay away from the fire hole in the Madison due to water temperatures.
Sure. Cool. Any recommendations for Bozeman area in late August?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, you have the Yellowstone to the east of there. You have the Missouri, which is to the north of there, as they're in the Gallatin, that are sort of their big fisheries in their little triangle.
Right.
If I
Yeah.
was a walk wade angler, I would probably look at the Gallatin, and I would look at it more from the Gallatin Gateway area south towards Big Sky and Big Sky to the national park boundary. And my reasoning because of that would be, I think that's where you're going to find water with a lot, highly oxygenated turbid water that's cold, that's still feeding out of the mountains. That's going to be the closest thing to you. You also would have the Madison that's going to be sort of right at your fingertips there. But if I was looking specifically with the Yellowstone lens, I would look at that um, the um, the Gallatin River.
Sure. All right, I'm gonna throw another one not in your area at you. Any
Okay.
recommendations for Pinedale, Wyoming?
Oh, the Sublette County folks they'll have me tied to a stake if I start telling secrets about that place.
I like it. All right, keeper.
No, the green, I would say the green is a phenomenal fishery, especially, and there's a lot of public access on it from Warren Bridge upstream. There's probably 10 or a dozen BLM campsites that operate on first come, first serve basis. They have vault toilets, fire rings. They're super nice. And there's enough difference in the water in that area where you do get some meadowy stuff. You get some stuff that drops at a little bit more of a gradient, something a little bit more turbid, dry dropper style. They've done a lot of stream restoration with log jams and deadfalls to create fish habitat. And it's a great place for a DIY angler, to wade fish in the summer season. You do have to keep in mind, as I was explaining earlier, anything below that Warren Bridge area downstream has a lot of private property and they are very proud of their private property. And that those private landowners own the river bottom and riparian area, so you need to be careful there.
Sure. Awesome. All right, coming up on the last few here. Recommendation, lake or stream near West Yellowstone and Jackson with easy access to take kids ages 10 and 13 to in late June or early July.
Gotcha. I would say, the West Yellowstone area, you'd be pretty limited there to Hebgen Lake or Quake Lake. Those are both pretty big lakes that are probably very family friendly in fishing. Lots of boat ramps, picnic areas, vault toilet facilities, things like that for young kids. There is a good amount of family fishing designated water in Idaho, and we have a pond here located right outside of Teton Valley that we call Connie's Pond or the Trail Creek Pond, that's designated as a family fishing waterway that where they stock fish, they encourage, harvest of fish, different techniques, right? It's like when kids are in that age, it's like just get them in fish, get reps in the space, just have fun with what you're doing and how you're doing it. So fly, spin, whatever. It's all sort of allowed there. And then if I was looking at Jackson, there is a fishing pond at the National Fish Hatchery north of town that is very family friendly, very similar to what I was saying. They host kids fishing opportunities with spin tackle or fly tackle or whatever. And then you've got Jenny, Lee, and String Lakes in Grand Teton National Park that are very accessible with a vehicle where you could fish, but you need to keep in mind all of those different places. You're talking about different states with different fishing licenses, with different regulations in different areas that you would need to do your due diligence to check out.
Sure. All right, one of the last two here. I think we kind of covered a little bit of this, but we'll jump into it quick again. Recommendations for smaller DIY creeks in the Teton area for August.
Sure. Hoback, Grovaunt, the Grays River, which is south of Jackson, which is a tributary to the Snake, and Palisades Reservoir. All of those have accessibility from a Forest Service road where you basically can go as far as you want, as long as you want, and check out whatever pullout you want and fish in either you're in a national park or national forest or something like that, and you wouldn't have to worry about any type of trespassing or private property. You also in August would have Flat Creek and some of the other creeks that I was mentioning, sort of quickly there, that are great for an hour or so, but they're very highly technical fisheries. So depending on your skill set or your expectations of what you wanted to do for the day, you'd have those at your fingertips. I find that those I'm more successful the more time I spend out there because they're really hard, but they're really, fun in that sense too.
Cool. Awesome. All right, last one here. Any comments or suggestions on how to fish the weedy, grassy rivers, like you mentioned, like the Firehole and the Madison, as compared to those rockier bottom rivers with boulders and big pools and things like that?
Sure. I think, your best and easiest application of a fishing technique in water like that is obviously going to be a dry fly, right? Because hopefully you will see the fish rising in some type of form, with some type of cadence, and you'd be able to target them and see them and make a plan, to make your target. If those fish aren't rising and you can't necessarily see them and you're just prospecting, through an area, the the swinging of soft tackles on especially the Madison is super effective because you're targeting a lot of those weedy, grassy areas, but you're not going too deep, right? Your 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 confidence in the fish is that the fish is going to come up and eat your fly, right? Fish don't necessarily like to be broadsided or have something taken underneath them. So if the conditions are right, the fish should come up to eat or at least investigate your fly or your presentation. So I like those 5 foot and 7 foot poly leaders. A lot of different fly line manufacturers make them, Airflow, Orvis, all sorts of stuff, Scientific Anglers. And I carry them in a couple different weights and a couple different lengths in my waist pack when I'm fishing. And I can switch in between techniques really easy because I'm just using a floating line. Let's say I put on a 5 foot slow sinking poly leader and maybe 3 feet a 0, 1, or 2X, and I tie on my soft tackles, and I can cast 45 degrees downstream and then start swinging my flies through those weedy, grassy areas, to target those fish that are sort of hiding in there or living in there. If I come into a spot where the water's deeper, I'll cast more upstream and I'll give it a couple more mins to get that presentation deeper. If it's really shallow, sometimes I just sort of bring it 60 degrees and down. And
Hmm.
then I can, walk back to the truck and go to a different spot, take my poly leader off, put my floating, my normal tapered leader on, and fish however I would be fishing. But that's a very classic and effective way to fish the Madison and Farrell. And it's really fun too, because it's different than your, nymphing with an indicator, which
Sure.
can be effective on those rivers just in certain areas, or your dry fly fishing. I carry those things all the time because if I'm fishing up a creek or a river, and let's say I'm fishing a dry dropper and then I'm walking back to my truck, I like to put on that poly leader and a small streamer. And
Sure.
then I
Sure.
can go back through some of those pockets and pick up a couple other fish or find something different. And I'm carrying one rod, one reel, one line, and a couple of leaders, and I'm not carrying an extra spool with a sink tip.
Yeah.
They don't cast the best, but they're super efficient and easy to use.
Yeah, I hate carrying more than one rod around on the river and whatnot. So yeah, if you can stick to one rod, why wouldn't you, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Love it.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, Mike. That was a lot of questions. Hit you with a lot, but
It's
we
all good. That's
learned a
why I'm
lot from
here.
you. So
Nope.
thank you so much for your time tonight. We really appreciate it. Eric, I'll pass it off to you for any other final things, but I just wanted to let everyone who is still on the call know that if you are a Montana native, we are going to be we're going to be out at the BHA Rendezvous this coming weekend. So come see us, come visit the booth, come say hey. We would love to see you all there and chat some fishing. So,
Awesome.
Eric, take it away to close us out.
Yeah, Mike, I just wanted to say thank you again. That was fantastic. So much information to dig in, and I'm really excited to have you on and give you an opportunity to connect with our audience too. It was a lot of fun. I know I learned a ton. I hope everyone else did as well. Please go check out WorldCast Anglers. They have so much information and so many resources, and are more than happy to get you out on the water in this amazing part of the country. So, Mike, thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us. Hopefully we can do it again. And we a great thing about our culture here at WorldCast Anglers is, as you've probably experienced from the presentation, we don't hold any information like tight to in lock and key. We're always very sharing of it. So I do that on our fly fishing forecasts on social media, on YouTube, and everything. So if you're coming out this way, tune in on those, and I give those every week with a lot of current information. You're always welcome to stop in the fly shop, give us a call. But I just want to say thanks to you guys for the opportunity, and it was fun, getting to talk to everybody about fishing in my backyard. And yeah, hopefully we get to do it again soon.
There we
Absolutely.
go. All right. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate you. And we will see you all on the next one.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.